All right. Yes, we good? Okay, cool. All right. So a few things. Any questions, first of all? Where is everybody? Too cold? Okay, so today we're going to talk about a few things. So last time we were talking about Lambda. We looked at a couple of different ways of activating Lambda. So you saw things like activating on an S3 bucket or an S3 event. We saw activating on a CloudWatch event. Another way of using Lambda is with what is called Amazon's Gateway API. Okay, so their Gateway API basically is a framework where you can set up a RESTful web API. Okay, so all a RESTful web API is basically it's sort of a stripped down version of a website. That is, essentially, you can do GET requests, you can do POST requests, etc. for manipulating or having various services happen. Now, traditionally, essentially, what happens in those to build such a thing is essentially you have a server-side program running. So basically, you have some server running, typically a web server and an application server. It's hosting the code that's going to run. It's sitting there listening all the time for incoming requests, and then basically serves those things out. Okay. With Lambda, we can basically trigger Lambda functions off of the AWS Gateway API. Okay, now, setting that up manually sucks. It is really absolutely horrible, right? Going through the console it is just so incredibly painful. I was actually sort of reading one article where they were complaining about it, basically labeling it not ready for prime time, because they were basically saying, oh, there's about 20 steps you have to do to set up like a single endpoint, like for one GET function, and and again, when you do that, when you're given tools like that, generally people aren't going to use those. Or most of the time what happens, what we tend to see a lot with Amazon, because Amazon really they're tool builders. They tend to give us little APIs and various things, and then are like, here, go unpack the universe with this, right? And you can, but usually you're going to be doing a lot of work to do this and all that. So inevitably, either Amazon or somebody else comes up with sort of a wrapper for those particular services, usually to make them manageable. That's what this is. Okay, so Chalice, which I have this link here, basically gives us the ability to do serverless frameworks within AWS. It will allow us to create an AWS Gateway API, hook it up to having Lambda functions run in the background and all of that, and do so in a way that at least allows you to keep some semblance of sanity. Okay, it really is a joy to use. Okay, so I'll show you kind of how to use that. I also have a couple of other links here. So one is I was actually gonna sort of go through this, and I thought, you know what, the tutorial's kind of interesting. So I'll just point it out. So this thumbnail generator using Chalice. Basically, it was a blog post on a recent edition of Chalice. What they added here was the ability for binary content types. Okay, so prior to this, being able to do things like create a gateway API that, for instance, takes an image as input and then generates an image as output was a pain. Generally, what you basically had to do in that case was essentially you'd upload it to an S3 bucket, work on it there, maybe spit it back out to another S3 bucket, etc. Okay, but the API gateway itself didn't really have that handling for raw binary content. So they added it into the gateway. They added support into Chalice. So here they actually show you sort of how to build up just a little thumbnail generator and all of that using that. The coolest part about this that I just kind of wanted to point out was how they go about getting Pillow on the server. And so basically what they do is all the way, where is it? Yeah, down here. Okay. So unlike what we did, where basically we sort of fired up our own version of Amazon Linux and basically we literally installed Python manually, compiled Python, then installed our packages. Here they're actually using the pip tool. So the pip tool, remember, basically is one of Python's packaging tools for downloading stuff. What they're actually using right here is Many Linux. Okay, so what this actually gives you the ability to download packages that will essentially run on various Linux versions. So right from, for instance, even on Windows, I can actually download the appropriate package for Pillow, have that installed in the appropriate place here, and then upload it and so forth. I actually kind of want to go back and try using this technique to do the other thing, but anyways. So, certainly it's something to kind of look at, play around with, and all of that. Certainly, follow through. It is kind of interesting. And yeah, you get this nice little service and so forth, but it's there. What I wanted to show today, again, I wanted to introduce Chalice and kind of show you how you can begin setting that stuff up. And again, I like to use these things to also kind of slip in additional APIs from Amazon. So the one that we're actually going to look at today is called Polly. So Amazon Polly, notice, turns text into, well, lifelike, I don't know if it's lifelike speech, but it's basically a text-to-speech service. Okay. Incidentally, if you want to go the other way, that is, take speech and turn it into text, there's also a service for that. It's called Lex. So anyways, Amazon does have these two things. So basically, what we're going to build is a web page that allows the user to sort of type in some text. It will basically take that text, send it along to our server. Our service will spin up automatically as a Lambda function. It will convert the text into an MP3 file and basically allow the user to play that. Okay, so that's essentially where we're going with this stuff. There's kind of a bunch of code. Some of it's just kind of icky little details and all that. So today, rather than spend a bunch of time live coding, I'm going to kind of load up the code and we'll kind of go through the different parts. We'll play around with different things and all that, just so you can kind of get a sense of what's happening with these things. But again, I think that it is fairly well put together. All right, let me show you how you would actually kind of create this from the start. So I'll just create a Python thing here. Let me call it say it. Yeah, we'll open it in the current window. That's fine. All right. The first thing I want to show, just because. So most of the time when we've been installing Python packages, we've basically been installing them globally. And I mean, that's fine, especially if they're packages that you tend to use quite a bit. On the other hand, if you want a sort of more controlled environment, generally what you do is you create a virtual environment. Okay, so I want to show you just kind of in PyCharm how to actually do that. We'll install Chalice along that vein and so forth. So I'm going to do Control-Alt-S to pull up the project settings here. And so notice I'll go to Project Say It down here, and I'm going to go to the project interpreter. Okay. And so all I'm going to do is click on the little gear icon here and select the option for Create a Virtual Environment, VirtualEnv. Okay, so VirtualEnv basically is sort of the Python package for doing this sort of virtual environments setup. Okay, then I need to select where I want to put it. Now, PyCharm seems to want you to put it someplace outside of your project. I actually prefer to just put it inside with the project, so that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm just going to navigate over to let's see, to my desktop. I think where did I put this? I have this. Yeah, documents. Okay. So let me navigate to my project, which is in, don't need that, come on. Just thinking hard. All right, try this again. Create a virtual environment. Okay, there's that. Documents, courses. So there's where I have that. I'll create a new folder called venv. You can really call it whatever you want, but that's what I'm calling mine. And then I'll give it a name, namely, since we're using Chalice, and I'll make sure to inherit the global site packages. So I'll check that. I'm not going to make it available to all projects. So we do that. It will then create the appropriate virtual environment for us. Okay, so there it is. Then for installing the Chalice package, I can just come up to here. Now when I install it, it'll actually install into this virtual environment. So I'll just come here like we did before, install Chalice. It's installing. And, so they give you a whole sort of run through of Chalice, etc. There's a quick start. All right, so here they're kind of talking about dealing with this is what you would do basically if you were dealing with that manually for dealing with VirtualEnv and so forth. Anyways, let's go back. Yes, installed successfully. Yay. All right. Now, the other thing that's actually nice about that's kind of nice about Chalice is that it actually gives us the ability to set up the appropriate configuration for our system. So a lot of times with different kinds of frameworks, you have to have certain files with particular names and very specific paths and all these kinds of things. And a lot of times they just sort of leave you to your own to actually write those things by scratch. Chalice doesn't do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the terminal here. Right, and so I can check that Chalice is installed by running, for instance, check version, or I could, right. So there it is. I could check the help. Right, and there's the various options and so forth. So the one I wanted to point out first is this one here, new project. So calling Chalice with new project basically creates the boilerplate stuff that we need. Now, the only little rub with all this, and especially dealing with VirtualEnv the way we are, notice I've created my project already, and so I kind of need to do a little hack, if you will. So notice I'm going to change to the directory above my project, here, cloud computing instead of say it, and now I'm going to do Chalice new project, right? If I did say it, you'll notice basically saying, okay, generate that in there. Notice it says, oh, that directory already exists. I'm not going to do that. Okay, so that's kind of a problem. So what I can just do is I can just put in something like say it dev. Now it'll generate a separate folder with that stuff that I can then move over into here. Okay, so if I go to take a look at that, we'll see. Right, here's say it dev, right, and here's the stuff that it basically generated. So I'm just going to grab these things here, right? I'm going to cut, and I'm just going to dump that into the say it folder over here, and now I should have the stuff that I need. Then I will change back into my say it directory. So notice it creates this .chalice folder. That's one of the things that it creates. And there's a JSON config file here. I do want it to be called say it, not say it dev, so I'll just change the app name there. And the rest of the stuff I'm just going to, I'll just leave. Okay. In app.py, we see that yes, we have our the sort of very basic framework for doing this. Again, in terms of the app name, I'll make sure that I'm consistent across this, and there it is. Now, the Chalice framework is essentially based on a framework in Python called Flask, which is sort of a minimalistic web programming framework for Python. Okay, so the whole idea is, notice we have these, this is a decorator in Python, basically saying, okay, here is the route that, that the person is going to access. So basically the root, R-O-O-T, of our web application will essentially just return this thing here, right? And so we have this function here, it's a named function, and so forth. How do we actually use this? So there's a couple of things. Chalice will do the deploy of our project to AWS for you. So we'll see how to do that in a little bit. But I just want to show you here, we can actually test all of this stuff locally as well. So if I come down here and I run Chalice local, yeah, sure, that's fine. There we go. Okay, so now I have a server running on localhost port 8000. Let me go ahead and just grab that. I'll go over to a browser. Right, and so notice when I visit the when I basically visit the root, bless you, I get back essentially really what is JSON. Okay, it's returning a JSON object to us. So what's nice is you do have the ability to kind of test locally and everything rather than doing the deploy out to Amazon, testing it. So again, kind of nice. All right. As I said, I don't want to be spending a whole lot of time coding. I want to spend the time kind of looking at the code that we have and all of that. So let me do this. Is that font too small? Yes, no, maybe.
It's fine.
It's fine? Okay. All right. So here's sort of the completed or modified version and so forth, right? So notice here I have a global variable for the name of the bucket that we're going to use for storing this stuff. I've written a function here called text to speech that will allow us to specify the text as well as the voice. We'll talk about what that is in a minute, and essentially then generate the appropriate text. What this does right now is so it generates the text, it generates the appropriate MP3 and so forth, and then ultimately basically writes that to an S3 bucket. I mean, we can basically see that stuff here. So it's writing it to the S3 bucket. It ultimately returns the URL to that particular file. What essentially, this is actually based, most of this code, so I didn't actually write, or I've modified that code or hacked it up. What that code actually comes from is I have this, have this link right here, this AWS Polly, Python Polly example code, right? So it basically takes you to this, and here they kind of show you, this is roughly the same code. The only difference is here they're actually going to sort of play this code, play the result directly. Okay, so that we can kind of play around with these things. I'll actually kind of add in some of this stuff just so you can kind of see this. No, I want you out further. That's where it should be. All right. Yes, we need to import sys. Yes, we need to import subprocess. Nope. All right. So let's see kind of what this does and so forth, and then we'll talk about the code. All right. Let's. Okay, so I've imported app. Notice we have the text to speech function here. So let's just say. Let's see if I can remember. I think there's one of the voices named Amy. What? Groove music? Really? And that failed. All right, let me do it this way. This way it will actually ask me, should ask me. Do that. Ah, good.
Hello from AWS.
There it is. Yeah.
Like where can we know that how many voices does Amazon support?
So the voices that Polly gives us. I don't think I did put the link. And so they actually have voices with sort of different accents and so forth for particular languages, right? So for Danish, notice there's a male-female voice, Dutch, etc. English, we have Australian English, right? So for instance, up here, I could do the same thing that we just did with Nicole.
Hello from AWS.
Okay. And so forth. Right, so you can see we have British English, and so on. So there actually are quite a few voices. I do have a script here, this one here, that will that basically queries the Polly service and will generate the list of voices. So for instance, if I run this get voices here, go ahead and run this. Okay. It's actually the format that it's printing them out in is this kind of HTML list format because ultimately I use this for generating the page. But we can see, right, so there's one called Russell, it's Australian English, and so on all the way through. So a few voices. Okay. Now that we've seen kind of that coolness and all of that, let's take a look at what's really happening in the code. Okay. And actually, the code really isn't that bad. The only thing that's a little involved is the fact that basically the Polly service will essentially only do the text to voice for a maximum of 1,500 characters. So the string that I send it can be a maximum of 1,500 characters. So what this with this section basically here does is it essentially breaks it up into roughly chunks of around 1,000, 1,100, somewhere somewhere in there. So essentially, breaks if it does happen to be longer, it's going to break that down and so forth. Then basically what happens though is ultimately we will get one sound file because ultimately we're essentially writing and appending. In fact, you can see that right here is where we're writing the sound file. So the A basically stands for append, which means essentially if the file is there, we're going to append. The B means we're writing out straight binary data. We're not doing any conversions there. Okay, so that's what's happening with the chunking here. Then you see, okay, yes, we're creating the Polly client. I specify a file name. The file name that I'm essentially creating is just a UUID. So we have a unique ID that is created and with now a .mp3 extension that will ultimately be stored, right? Inside the loop, so for every one of the chunks, right, we basically call the service, we write the append to that particular file, and then basically you're done. Okay, now let me change this back over to
So,
yes.
where is the file getting, like, if you're saving the file to somewhere, where is it saving?
So yes, let's take a look at that. So notice, so the file name itself is basically that it's this UUID. Then if you take a look here is where we actually decide where to save it. So I'm calling the getTempDir function that is part of the OS module, right? Which basically, so depending on what system I'm on, if I'm on Windows, it goes to the appropriate temp directory for Windows. If I'm on Linux, it'll go to /temp, etc. Right? So this OS path.join basically gets the full path to the tempdir, puts the appropriate path separator in between them, and then the file name. So ultimately, it's going to a temp directory on whichever system I'm using.
So does this file remain forever, or does this file get deleted after?
Well, right. So remember, I mean, with Lambda functions themselves, right? That environment basically gets thrown away. So once my Lambda function is basically done, that environment can basically is deconstructed. And essentially, any temp files that are there are gone, right? Which is why then we're going to do this part, right? So I'll leave this code in. I'll just comment it out. So this, and again, let me, I think I actually have it in the comments there. Okay, so I did want to point out, so I also have this other link, build your own text-to-speech application with Amazon Polly. So they have this here. This, notice, uses a fairly complex looking architecture. Okay, so essentially what I did is kind of took some of their code, hatcheted it to be simpler. Okay, but some of this code, for instance, for generating things and so forth, does actually was stolen from them. Anyways, okay, so create the S3 client. Right, I have some print statements in here. One of the downsides of this, the debugging support sucks. So, for instance, I had a permissions issue that was happening. All I was getting was server error. Nothing was showing up in the CloudWatch logs or anything like that. So basically what I had to resort to was putting in print statements in various parts of my text-to-speech function, so then I could go back to the log to see, okay, where did it actually get to, so then I could guess what, try to figure that out. So there, again, Chalice is kind of newish, so, I guess they're going to be working on that. But nonetheless, okay. So we create the client, again, nothing fancy there. Notice I'm doing upload file. We actually saw this in the past example for uploading files, so nothing really special there, right? Again, I basically get that temporary file. There's the bucket name. There's the actual file name. That does the upload, right? Then the other thing, this one is new, is basically setting it to be publicly readable. So after we've created the object in S3, notice from Bodo, I can say, oh yeah, by the way, way that object is publicly readable. Okay. Then ultimately, I just return essentially the URL to that particular thing. Okay. So now that I have this, now that I've kind of done this change, I can actually show you. Right. So once again, let me go over to AWS, and I'll go to S3 here. This bucket, it's actually, in fact, let me do it this way. Let me go. Cool. All right, so I've gotten rid of the bucket altogether. Let me go ahead and create it just to show you. There's nothing really special set on this, so I essentially give it a name. That's the name that I have set in the text itself, and I'm just going to go ahead and click create. Okay, so that's it. Nothing special about setting any permissions, setting it to static website, none of that stuff. It's just a plain old S3 bucket. All right. Okay, let's play around with this here. So now that I have that, again, let me reload my Python console. Import it. Actually, no. From app, import star. Let's do it that way. Okay. So now, when I call text to speech, so notice, it gives me basically this URL, which I can click and download that particular file. All right, so let's go ahead and play that first of all.
Hello from AWS.
Okay. So it does in fact generate it, and it is storing it in S3. Where is S3? Over here. There's the file. Okay. So notice, yeah.
So the file name is not like, what do you say, a user interactive file name?
No, it's a unique identifier.
Yeah, so is it compulsory to use a unique identifier to name a file?
Yes. Because this way I don't have to worry about it being overwritten by other people using the service.
Okay.
We're gonna. I think you're getting at a usability issue, but when you see the actual web interface, you'll see it. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So notice our service basically works. We can see that it is in fact generating the appropriate stuff and all that. Okay. So that's the text to speech function. Let's take a look at the actual route itself. So for the route itself. Right here we specify the route. We have /say it as our route. So that is for interacting with this. Someone needs to go to our server /say it to be able to interact with this. Then we have this. Anybody know what CORS stands for? Right. Cross origin response. Right. Basically, here's the idea. In JavaScript, if I want to, from a web page, make a request back to some service, generally the rule for browsers is that I can only call a service from whence I came, from the server that I came from. So if I have my web page on that same server, you're good. But I don't have a server. Right? I got a Lambda function that gets spun up as needed. So you are able to make requests back from other than your origin, cross origin, thus CORS. So CORS basically is this standard. While AWS supports it, it is not their fault. They did not create this. But nevertheless, it is something that we need to deal with. So by saying set CORS to true on this particular route, essentially I'm saying I'm allowing for cross-origin requests to come in to this particular, to my particular service, right? Otherwise, I'm going to have issues. And we'll turn it off. We'll kind of play around and see kind of what happens and all those. Yeah.
Can you set specific URLs from there?
Yeah, you can. If you know the domains, you can actually set up the headers properly. Right here, I'm simply saying I'm going to allow it from any domain. But yeah, technically, all that granularity is in fact built into is built into CORS. Again, doing this stuff, setting this up manually from the AWS Gateway API. Oh my God, it's horrible. It is. This is so much better. All right. Okay. So the way this this web API is set up, right? There's basically one endpoint. Say it. That's it. Okay, and we have to pass along essentially two parameters, right? So one is text and one is voice. Basically, we pass along the text that we want said. We pass along the particular voice that we want it said in, and then we're going to pass that. We'll deal with that accordingly. Here's how you actually. So let's see. Do I have this running right now?
So you added a E.
Sorry.
You added a E in the text code file. Yeah. Text E wrap. Yeah.
There it is. Thank you. Yep. Okay, so let's take a look at playing around with this just so you can get a sense. What's nice about RESTful APIs, and especially when you're dealing with things like GETs, it actually is really easy to test out. So for instance, right here I can just say, okay, let's go to localhost. Oh, actually, I probably need to rerun this. Right, when you're running Chalice local, just Control-C to kill it. You can do Chalice local again to basically restart it up. There it is. Cool. All right. Okay. So when I call say it just like this, notice I get an error because I haven't passed along the appropriate parameters. Okay, so I haven't passed along the text that I want converted, and I also haven't passed along the voice that I want to use. The way this is, as I said, the way this is set up is to use URL parameters. So for instance, right, if I happen to search for AWS Polly on Google, okay, notice right there, right. So we go to the route that we're going to is /search. Then we have a parameter named Q that has the value AWS Polly. Then notice, bless you, we have some additional parameters sitting in there as well. Okay. So that's essentially how ours is going to work as well. That is that I can say $text is equal to hello and voice equal to and there it is, right? And again, I can test out to see.
Hello.
Pretty cool. Okay. Now, if we were dealing with what are called post requests, those are a little harder. Those I can't actually do directly through here, but then there's things like, for instance, you could use the command line tool curl, which that other thing that I showed you does provide. There's also, let's see, do I have it installed on this? I may or may not. There's for Chrome, I believe it's called Postman, and for Firefox, it's HTTP Requester, I believe. Either one, they basically pop up a little dialog. You can type in the URL. You can select what type. If you're doing a get, a post, etc. You can set all your headers. So you can actually emulate all of this stuff to again test to make sure that that things are working the way that you want, right? All right. So, yeah, there's the other stuff. Okay, cool. Questions so far, right? So notice, to do that, really isn't very much code at all. Okay, so here by going to app.current current request, so get the current request from the app, then get the query parameters, right? So here is how we're finding out whether they actually specified either of those parameters, right? So when you call the get method on essentially a Python dictionary, you can pass along a default value. In other words, if that key doesn't exist in the dictionary, then this is what I'm going to get back. I'm basically going to set it equal to none, because then I can use that in my test here, saying, okay, if they didn't specify the text or they didn't specify the voice, then we just return this little error JSON saying, hey, this isn't this isn't right. Yeah.
It's not a Polly question, it's more of a Python question. PHP we have a $_request to get the request. So that
Right.
you have to worry
Yeah.
about-
So yeah, basically what you have here is app.currentRequest. I mean, there's nothing preventing me, because again, I mean, I agree with you. That's a mouthful to actually type out, but I could do something like this. I could say, okay, request is app current request. There. Now I can just say rec and yeah, you can do that.
So this query params and .get will even get me the post request?
Right. So the get method here has nothing to do with the fact that I'm doing a get on, right? That's simply this is get from the dictionary. It's literally there's no web magic going on here. That's literally a method of the dictionary class in Python. Yeah.
Like going advanced in this, instead of providing the text itself, can I like provide a search text that goes to the Google and then the voice records whatever the result I'm getting on the web page?
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly build something like that. The hardest the hardest part about that is just dealing with the Google Search API, right? Because so essentially, then you're going to have to get a separate API key for the Google Search API and all of that. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing preventing you from coding it up. I mean. Once you what's nice about this actually too is realistically, the real magic for converting text to speech happens in text to speech. So, what other services you decide to build on this afterwards, that's, the sky's the limit. Okay. That's also kind of the appeal behind these sort of microservice RESTful APIs, right? The stuff that it's doing, I mean, notice, this is not a ton of code, right? And even if you're not a real Python programmer, when you can, for the most part, look and go, oh, okay, yeah, I can kind of get the sense of what's happening here, right? I mean, this is not rocket science, really. Okay. Yeah.
We obviously we can return string with HTML, but is there a way, for example, to call like template, like if it is in PHP template, and then use like to
Right. So you're talking right. Absolutely. I mean, you could. So Python has a whole host of templating languages. You could plug those in. You could actually you could literally build this up as if it were a proper web application in the sense that it's really returning HTML and all. Yeah, you could absolutely do that if you wanted to. Right. Yeah. There's nothing, and again, Python has various template libraries for you to use. So, yes, if you're familiar with that, you can absolutely do that. Right. In the case that we are successful, so we return this little thing. Notice. So we return basically just a little JSON object, or really it's a Python dictionary that ultimately gets converted to a JSON object. Right. So we have a key text that is literally whatever text they passed along. We have the voice. And then we have the actual the URL to where we to where that the actual binary file is. Okay. One of the things I should definitely mention this, right? I am not doing any kind of input validation, checking, filtering, etc. Bad programmer, right? Especially considering I'm the guy that teaches ethical hacking, right? Okay. Yeah, bad. Okay, I should totally be doing checking on this and all of that sort of stuff. I'm not. All right. Anyways, okay, so that's it for the Python stuff. That's really it for the service. Okay. Now, let me show you how easy it is to let's see, I'll show you a couple of different ways. Let me show you this. So which one am I in now? That's the desktop one. Okay, good. Close that. All right. So over here, I have index.html and styles.css. Okay, so CSS files. So in web programming, there is the holy trinity of client-side technology. HTML, which is about the structure of what you see, CSS, which is about presentation, and JavaScript, which is about behavior. So CSS basically just rules, notice, color things, etc., all of that. I'm not really going to go through all of this. Frankly, you don't even need to know any of this for what it is that we're doing. It just makes the page look prettier. Index.html. Right, so here's the actual code. Right, notice these should look familiar since I ran that particular script. That's how I actually generated that. Because what happened was when I was dealing with their build your own chatbot thing or whatever, it turned out that the index file that they gave you only had like a handful of the voices. It was like 5 or 6 voices, and I wanted all of them, so I put it in. All right. So that's all of those things, right? So basically, here's what this is. Let me show you what this. I'll do a couple of things here. Let me actually show you kind of how this works, and then we'll look at. I'll show you kind of what it does and how and all of that, and then we'll actually dive into the code to see kind of how it's actually doing that. Right. The main thing here is our API endpoint. Right now, since I haven't deployed it, I'm gonna just run this thing locally. Okay. So notice it's going to go to http:/localhost:8000. Say it right. Basically, just points to there for its endpoint. Okay. Let me open this up in a browser. So this is what it looks like, right? So that whole list, that garbage, that seeming garbage, all of this, that gives you this. Much nicer.
Did you type it out or scrape it?
Pardon? No, I scrape. Remember, yeah. That's what Get Voices does. I'm not going to do that manually. Hell no. All right. Right, so yeah, as I said, you don't have to do that manually. So there's those. The one thing that I did end up doing manually is when you do run this, if you pay close attention, I'll just kind of point this out. In some of the cases, you get diacritical marks, little accent marks over things and so forth. If you try to use that directly as the voice name, it ain't gonna take that. So yeah, I ended up having to do some little editing and stuff. But there are only a handful of those, so that was easy enough to do. All right, back over to this. Okay, so there's those, right? So again, we can select. Where's Nicole again? Let's pick on her some more. There she is. Okay, say it. Okay, so it runs my service. It basically then automatically puts in this little entry here.
Let's put another string on the barbie.
And there it is. Right. This, by the way, is why I don't care about what the name of the file is, right? Because it's just going to put this in and all of that. Okay.
Okay, so is this the output from the bucket or is it the output?
Yeah. This is literally output, right? So let me show you. So if I go here to inspect, actually, let me go to the player itself. So if I inspect on the player, okay, there's the actual link, right? Notice audio is the player. Then here's how we specify the source. There's the link to the actual bucket itself. Okay.
So generate another text.
Generate another. Sure. Okay.
If you use exclamation mark at the end, will it change the intonation?
Yeah.
Let's put another
shrimp on the barbie.
Ish.
Okay, so these are the files that are in the bucket that it is showing.
As it generates it because remember the web service returns essentially the text, right? So it returns the text, the voice, and the URL for the particular file that it's generated.
Can you repeat it again?
Yep. Let me go back over here. Right? So say it returns the text,
Okay.
the voice, and the URL. Okay. So this notice it isn't showing necessarily all of the files in there because we generated a couple of other ones, right? It's just saying, okay, as you're interacting with this, whatever ones it's putting those in the list and so forth. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at how this is done. I don't expect you to be JavaScript masters and all of that, but nonetheless, it's not a bad idea to at least kind of understand what's going on. Okay, so notice we have so here's our this select thing. We've basically passed it. We have an ID for that element. Okay, so HTML elements can have an ID attribute set for them. The idea behind an ID is that it should be unique on the page. That is, there should not be another element on the page that has that same ID. We use those IDs for a couple of different things. We use them sometimes in CSS for being able to identify an element to provide styles to it, and we use it a lot in JavaScript when we want to be able to access an element programmatically from JavaScript. Here we need that because basically our web page needs to know what voice was selected. Okay, so that's all that's happening there, right? So I basically provide a way of accessing that particular thing, right? There's all the stuff. Then, right here we have our button itself, right? Again, just to kind of go back through, right? So there's the actual Say It button itself, right? And again, I mean, you know, in any browser, generally you can sort of do inspects on these, and it kind of shows you about it and all that. So it's a good way of kind of looking at those things, right? We have our text area. Again, it has an ID. Basically, that's the area for entering in the text. Basically, this thing here, right? There it is, text area. Okay, there's our little character counter, right? That counts up the characters and so forth as we're typing. All right. This part here is where I load up jQuery. Okay, so jQuery is one of the most popular, most widely used JavaScript libraries out there. It is hosted on a CDN, right? So in the exam, I said, okay, you have to actually sort of load up all of your stuff for Bootstrap and all that locally. Normally, what you actually do is you use a CDN for that because it gets faster and all that. And this is roughly right. So if you go to jQuery's website, just Google jQuery CDN. It'll take you right to the thing that literally gives you this little thing to copy and paste into your script to do that, right? So this one line here is that. Now we get into it. Okay, so this code, this somewhat daunting looking code here is what does the magic. Okay, so let's take a look. Right. So as I said, I have this API endpoint variable that is a constant, so that is the value's not going to change throughout the run. Okay. Then we end up so this is how we attach a function to be run when the say button gets clicked, right? So notice here they're actually not using jQuery. Again, I snatched this code from the Amazon Polly example, right? Even though they loaded up jQuery, and they probably could have done this slightly easier by doing that, they're just saying, okay, get the element by the ID. There's the ID for that particular button. Again, just to refresh your memory. Right, there's the button, and its ID is say button. Right, there we actually look it up, set its onClick to the following function. This is an anonymous function. That's all that basically means. Okay. Yes.
What's the difference between giving the onClick, setting up the listener in the script rather and leaving it in the tag itself?
Yeah, right. So if you've done some HTML in the past, you may actually see things like this, onClick equals, and so and even the code. Generally, that's kind of frowned upon, usually because the most of the time what you actually do, and in fact they had done it with this, I actually put them together. Most of the time you'll have your JavaScript totally separate in a separate file, right? And so the idea is you do your JavaScript things in JavaScript and you keep your markup separate. So that's generally the sort of preferred style for those things, but yeah, you could actually do that.
Because right now the newer frameworks, they just use the click listeners, they ask us
Yep.
with the
Okay, so when the button gets clicked, and again, we can show this, so I can do console log. Go back over to here, reload this, right? Come over to here, right there I see, yeah, the button was clicked.
P5 profile.
Yeah, once you build it, it's just you can't not play with it, right? All right. So here we create we're creating oops, sorry. Okay, basically creating a JavaScript object, right? So we have one key for voice, and here is how we're getting the value from the voice field. This is using so the $sign there is the tip off of jQuery. That's typically the shorthand for that. So notice they're saying, okay, go to voice selected, get the particular one that is the particular option that is selected, get its value, right? So again, notice each of these has a value field that is the actual voice that we're interested in.
Actually, it should be enough just put ID without options.
Sorry?
In the code, it should be enough to use ID of the select and just put.
Yeah, probably it probably would. Again, I didn't write that code. Stole it from Amazon. All right. Similarly for the post text, right? So basically, we grab the post text. What is Ajax? It's not a cleaner. Right. So the A in Ajax, the first A stands for asynchronous, right? Asynchronous JavaScript something and XML. So a couple of things. First of all, we ain't doing XML at all, right? Originally, when Ajax came out, it was all about basically replying with XML and all that. Then people got fed up with that because XML is horrible, and you tend to see a lot of JSON passed around. Now we have things like YAML and other things too. I mean, you can really pass around any kind of data. But basically, the idea behind Ajax is it really allows our web pages to feel like they're desktop applications. Before Ajax, anytime you wanted to update the page, literally what you had to do was send some request to the server, basically get a new page, an entire new page sent back to you. With Ajax, essentially what we can do is we can make, from within the page, make a request back to the server to say, hey, give us some little bit of information, in this case the text, the voice, and the URL, and then we can use that to just update the page in place. Okay, without having to do this whole sort of round trip thing going on. So this is basically how you make that happen, right? So notice we specify here. I'm specifying the API endpoint, the type of thing that I'm using. There's the data itself, right? Then we have a callback function for what it is that we're supposed to do. When the Ajax request is successful, right? So notice here I'm actually the first thing I started doing was just logging out the response. So you'll notice when we came back over to here, this is where I'm getting this from, right? So this is actually that success function running and so forth. Okay. Then I create the player. Notice there's the player. So we basically just here create the audio control, set the source equal to response URL, right? Basically. That. Okay, so when I say response URL, basically I end up I get back this thing here, the actual URL. right? And then we build up, basically we literally build up the HTML in terms of raw string, right? So it's a table row, right? The first one is there's the voice, there's the actual text, and there's the player itself. And notice we are appending that to posts. Posts is my table. And that's all there is to that. Okay. Now, let's throw it up. So right now, remember, I'm running all this locally. Let's actually throw this up onto the server. So, Control C will kill, or not. Okay, fine. Die that way. Chalice deploy. This first part is pure awesomeness. Remember last time when we were dealing with that whole thing about like, oh, what permissions do I have to set? And then it was like, you ran it and then you saw, okay, I got this access error, and then, oh, I got to go back and, right? Chalice reads your code to figure out what permissions you need for your service, and then generates that automatically for you. All right, so I'll say, yes, I do want to continue.
Professor?
Yes.
So we have two functions in that in the app.python file.
Yes.
One is save and one is test. So are they going to upload it as two different?
It uploads as one file. Basically, just it uploads. So notice now that I have that, right, I can go to so I can go to a few places. So I can go to here's that. Where's Lambda? Okay. Here's my API gateway, right? When I click on this, I can actually see, oh yeah, it has a get method and so forth. I can go over to Lambda and I should, yeah, there's my Lambda as well. Right, so when I click on this, the code actually was uploaded, so we don't see the code directly. And oh, actually no, we do see. There's our code. Okay. All right, so now that I have that, let me just go back. Okay, so notice it gives me the URL for my gateway. So I'll just come over to here. And so there is that. Oh yes, actually, sorry, and make sure to put say it on the end. All right, so now when I reload this, okay, and it dies a horrible death. This is the thing I was talking about. So it turns out the magical thing of setting up the permissions is not foolproof. And so actually, if I take a look here, if I go to the Chalice folder, notice there is a policydev.json. So through my liberal use of print statements, what I actually was able to find was this here. Notice this is the only permissions that I have for S3, which basically says I'm allowed to change the access control list of objects in S3 and not, for instance, to upload things to S3. Somehow the code ignored the fact that I called upload file. All right, fine, we can fix this. So what you do basically is you can put that in. So it's the permission is put object. Okay. Then I can redeploy. What was the? Yeah, there it is. Chalice deploy, and this time we do tac no auto gen policy. Okay. So since I have this policy this policy file here, basically what it'll do is it'll see that that's actually different than the one that we have, and it will just update our policy for us. Bless you.
In case I wouldn't have given that key, would I have got that option? I clicked on no and then get an option to choose which policy I want?
So there's a couple. I mean, basically, so there's a couple of things, right? In terms of finding it, basically, that's what I think I essentially like went to IM roles, like because I can pull it. You can pull up the roles for this and everything and check that out. And so that's what I kind of did. I looked and I was like, oh yeah, it should be put object. Okay, so now that we have that, let's try this again.
Fee, fi, fo, fun.
And there it is. All right. That's it for today. Oh yes, and then once you are done with when you're done with your stuff on AWS, you call Chalice delete, and that basically tears the stuff down. So we'll get rid of the Lambda function, get rid of the role, and get rid of the gateway API.
Can you build tech Y option you do Linux?
Sorry.
The tech Y -y option for having all the.
Oh, what options are there?
Like for Chalice, if you want to delete it, it asks like if you want to delete it or not by asking yes or no.
Yes.
So can we do that tag?
Oh, I don't know that there's that option for sort of automatically saying yes or no. All right. That's it. I will see you next time.